Hey viewers, don't worry, I don't plan on making intro commentary a thing on these reviews, but since completing this yesterday, Project Winter has released their 1.1 update that amends some of the criticisms I made in this piece. Most notably, they've added a variety of player roles that enhance the diversity of the gameplay. This includes like a medic role where you can make health kits more easily, and a defector role where innocents can open traitor crates. They've also added a craftable 5th infantry slot and some other smaller changes, such as a new global event and some animations that go alongside the emote menu, and a load of other smaller adjustments that you'll see if you decide to pick up the game. That being said, I still think many of the points in this review remain relevant and true to the game's core, and so I've decided it'll still be worth your time, if nothing else, to get a sense of Project Winter's fundamentals. At the very least, contrasting this review with the game's new feature list will show you the developers clearly listen to their community and make amends to adjust to them, which is always fantastic to see. So with that out the way, here's the video. Escaping apocalyptically cold conditions with a survivor group size you could count on your hands sounds like a daunting task. Doing so while certain members of your crew attempt to sabotage your efforts makes for the chaotic collapse of trust and order that keeps replaying Project Winter fresh and enjoyable. A game where arming yourself with wit and caution is just as pertinent as a loaded shotgun, surviving in Project Winter may at first seem a simple and shallow task, but thoughtful mechanics and encouraging player-to-player interaction bring depth and excitement to this welcome new take on traitor-based gameplay. Playable with a minimum of 5 up to a maximum of 8 players in both private and public lobbies, Project Winter initially presents a deceptively simple task. Repair the necessary equipment on the map in order to call in one of the game's various randomized escape options. Meanwhile, 1 to 2 randomly selected and unidentified traitors are expected to halt the party by any means necessary. Though it's not the first game with an innocent traitor dynamic, Project Winter's demand for collaboration in order to overcome its secondary antagonist, the unforgiving Icy Tundra, forces a symbiotic relationship between the two survivor factions, especially in the early game. Survivors attempting to repair generators and radio beacons will need to cooperate in order to open multi-switch doors, gain access to previously sealed map tiles, and fight aggressive Arctic fauna, as they salvage supplies, or commit to the slow and expensive route of crafting the items themselves, a task not helped by an extremely limited 4-slot inventory. The role of traitor is also far from an easy one. Opening the round with no extra equipment beyond a radio, traitors must choose whether to play along with the group and wait for the opportune moment to betray them, or hope they can survive exclusively on the traitor crates that litter the landscape, long enough to prevent the survivors from completing their exfil. Whilst leaving early may sound initially tempting, players may risk others voting for their exile from the cabin, the game's central hub and only location for crafting, cooking and permanent warmth, making corrupting the group from the inside often much more tempting than rushing out of the blizzard with a shotgun. A clever traitor will pair mechanics like poisoning food, stealing dead players' appearances and damaging switches alongside psychological manipulation to divide groups and lure solo players to quiet spots for executions, all of which comprise some of the game's most exciting moments for both innocent and betrayer alike.
Ow! Got him! Oh, got him! Ah! Got him, please! No! Help!
Careful attention has clearly been spent balancing the two roles, with parties having to play to their respective strengths in order to overcome the other. For example, guns are far from an instant kill against a full health player, meaning a traitor can't just go full Rambo and machine gun sweep survivors, yet when used on a cold and isolated player, guns suddenly become a ruthless executioner's tool. Equally, traitors with radios have long-range communication from the beginning, but crafty survivors can build radios of their own and listen in on traitor communications, providing they're willing to sacrifice the resources. Especially impressive was the game's capacity to generate shifting suspicion organically over the course of each match. Early on, weapons are rare, requiring scrap that must be salvaged from locked buildings, but traitors with access to crates and airdrops may acquire these much faster. Naturally then, players with weapons in the early game are treated with high suspicion, yet come the closing minutes of the round, the need for a weapon is high, and so choosing when to reveal your firearm becomes its own conscientious choice. Though some of the fun of inventory deception and confusion is admittedly lost when players just demand that you finger the scroll wheel until they're satisfied that you don't have any suspicious items. Also appreciated was the lack of any utility to reveal the role of a player upon their death, both encouraging players to feel greater weight behind their decision to kill someone, but equally allowing traitors to keep their anonymity as group members thin, whilst keeping party suspicion high right up until the endgame. Players can choose to commit time to unlocking a truth serum, allowing one player to see the role of another, but with no way to confirm the claims of tester or testee. What you take from those results is still founded entirely on who you think you can trust.
I got stuck on the other side.
Get out my fucking car.
What are you talking about? Beyond winning trust, observation is a survivor's bread and butter. Lookout points marked by yellow flags allow players to temporarily trade their enclosed isometric style camera for a wide and expansive survey of the nearby terrain, as useful for witnessing otherwise hidden murders as for spotting much needed food berries. Player-generated snow trails also serve as more than pleasant aesthetics, allowing traitors to stalk victims or innocents to piece together who just sabotaged a door mechanism, cleverly throwing players some suspicious breadcrumbs without outright telling them how things went down. With the need to integrate into the party and share information being central elements of gameplay, a strong communication system is a necessity, and for the most part Project Winter provides. Voice chat operates either on proximity or through radios and is remarkably well implemented, perhaps no surprise given Project Winter's chat is powered by Vivox Comms, the same technology behind the chats of some pretty major titles. With high quality voice audio in both lobby and matches alike, communicating by voice never felt like a burden. The fading volume levels based on player proximity was also fluid and intuitive. At times the combination of the isometric viewpoint and varied volume can make the direction of sound difficult to discern.
Hello?
But for the most part, voice chat serviced the gameplay well and never detracted from the enjoyment. Text chat, however, was a more disappointing feature. Text, like voice, has been given a proximity feature, and players too far away will only receive partial sentences. In itself, this mechanic was really cool, and didn't afford text players an advantage. However, I often found my messages would not broadcast for up to 15 seconds on occasion, meaning I could outrun my own messages, and making collaborating with other players extremely difficult at times. That being said, some of the text chat's lacking is compensated for by a quick and clear emote system that works well for basic comms like yes, no, or I'm cold. Also worth noting is while it's no fault of the game, public server responses to text chat could be quite inconsistent as well, and I ran into everything from patience to surprising rudeness in rounds where I was micless. The expectation for a player to have a mic is common, and you may encounter occasions where your text will be entirely overlooked as players attempt to understand why you aren't talking. However, the game's central themes of teamwork and trust clearly lend themselves to voice communication, and whilst going in text only far from ruins the enjoyment, be prepared for occasionally finding matches a little more complex than your voice chat counterparts. Beyond the variety granted by player unpredictability, the central gameplay loop can begin to feel a little repetitive after you pass maybe 15 to 20 rounds played. Project Winter's 9-tile map system means players face a fresh yet familiar terrain each time they load in. Laying out in a diamond shape centered around the unchanging spawn cabin area, the game map then selects from a handful of tiles randomly to assemble the surrounding area. Though the map isn't particularly large and after just a few games layouts can become surprisingly familiar, the system does keep players from getting bored of their surroundings, or from gaining the map knowledge that would allow experienced players to run circles around their newer peers. However, whilst the map changed, my options were a little more restricted. The main objective of collecting and crafting scrap can be spruced up by crafting weapons or radios, or by trying to complete some of the requirements for certain clothing unlocks, but this never really encouraged any major straying from the main scavenger state. That being said, the promise of future additions including backpacks, craftable pistols, and a cabin broadcasting system gives me hope that a solid yet simplistic mechanics loop will continue to see new options for play. Replay is also incentivized by a points-based progression system. Players are awarded points following the end of a match based on both their contribution to their objectives, their survival skills, and their time alive, as well as traitors or innocents killed. Points can be either put into the progression system, which allows players to purchase items upon the completion of certain in-game objectives, or can be invested into loot boxes. It's worth noting, however, that these crates can often be bought after fewer than 10 games, buy only aesthetic items, and can only be bought on the marketplace for what is less than £0.50 usually. So as far as they go, this was by far one of the least offensive implementations of loot crates I've seen. However, slight map variations and clothing unlocks are unlikely to be enough to keep you playing long term, and the mileage you get from Project Winter will likely vary quite substantially depending on the quality and variety of player encounters you find across your playtime. Project Winter's art style is best described as simplistic and sleek. The game's visuals are centered less on high-res textures and staggering lighting, and leans more towards a slightly more cartoonish style. That being said, Project Winter is far from an ugly Arctic tundra, with vibrant colours in the environment and on player models really popping against the blanket white snow, with thin wispy wind lines and swirling particles, nailing a true sense of cold when outside. Mute brown cabins and scratched stone outposts littered across Project Winter's icy expanse cast long shadows in the gentle oranges of the round sunset. Without wanting to torture you with a high school creative writing class any longer, it should be clear that Project Winter's icy plateau is as equally beautiful as it is harsh. Another particularly nice touch was the shifting of the camera from a far-off bird's eye view when outside to a much closer and tighter perspective for interiors, not only useful for navigating the smaller spaces inside buildings, but also in giving that warm, cozy feeling of stumbling in from the storm. Animations are equally intricate, particularly on players, where I was surprised to even see the rise and fall of breath along with each frosty exhale. Animal animations mostly upheld the same standard, though they occasionally seemed a little off from their hitboxes, making it sometimes difficult to properly evade or fight them. Credit should also be given for a non-invasive and tidy user interface, a feature many other indie survival games crucially get wrong, either cramming too much information on the screen or going so minimal that players are lost. Project Winter sits the fine line between both and lets you focus on its enjoyable gameplay from the get-go, rather than having to decipher the crafting system and figure out what the game expects you to do. Game sound, whilst perfectly adequate, was nothing to rave about and could have done more to match the icy aesthetic and enhance that feeling of oppressive cold when outside. But equally, it's understandable that a game that relies on communication as its central mechanic may not want to distract with an overly noisy environment. Music takes a similar backseat role behind visuals in selling Project Winter's aesthetic, but the gentle and lonely sounding guitar strings bolster that feeling of eerie isolation that you'll doubtlessly meet as you wander across the abandoned snowscape. Project Winter may be considered a relatively minute title, especially when held in comparison with other treachery-based titles on the market. But sacrificing scale has allowed the game to nail its details, incentivizing cooperative play to blossom while simultaneously providing a dynamic toolset through which traitors can cause trust to rot, make surviving a round in Project Winter's beautifully barren terrain not only a technical endeavour, but a personal one. With Other Ocean Interactive promising a plethora of new additions to come, including new maps and workshop support, the game's future looks promisingly expansive. Serving up rounds as diverse as the players you share them with, if survival and sleuthing sound like a winning combination, then Project Winter may just prove itself an enjoyable new take on betrayal-centric gameplay.